blue and red, there are now mental health programs for kids that are shutting down, and kids who have been relying on really important adults in their life, these counselors and social workers, are losing access.
As we look at mental health grants across the country, we have to make sure that those programs are being used to serve best in those communities.
We know what we need in Northwest Connecticut, and what we need is for the federal government not to rip funding away from these kids in need in the middle of the service program.
Or to better allocate the dollars you have and provide those professionals across the state. Viewpoint diversity is exchange of ideas that's actually better, absolutely. Now here, because Harvard only has 3%, by its own numbers, 3% conservative faculty. Do you think they are allowing enough of viewpoint diversity through that teaching on campus?
Where in the statute does it give you the ability to cut off federal funding for a university based upon your decision, your determination that they don't have viewpoint diversity? Can you cite to a statute, an authority that Congress has given you to micromanage the viewpoint diversity of a college?
In recent years, the federal government invested billions in school-based mental health programs, especially through the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, to support children struggling with trauma, anxiety, and depression. But in a surprising move, the Department of Education recently canceled about $1 billion in active mental health grants, citing unspecified civil rights violations.
And thank you to both of you for being here today. A few years ago, we worked really hard across the aisle to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, a bill that made changes in our gun laws, but in large part because it was a real priority for my Republican colleagues, also included billions of dollars in funding for school-based and children's mental health. Earlier this year, you did something extraordinary. You canceled $1 billion worth of existing ongoing grants to schools all across the country. And it's extraordinary because you didn't cut off new grants, you cut off existing grants. So in states all across the nation, blue and red, there are now mental health programs for kids that are shutting down, and kids who have been relying on really important adults in their life, these counselors and social workers, are losing access. You know Connecticut very well. You shut off a program that provides mental health resources to kids in crisis in Northwest Connecticut. When they did a survey of these kids and asked the kids who are in this particular program who the one adult was who they would go to if they were in mental health trouble or in response to a trauma, every single one of those kids in that program named the counselor funded by this program. You've shut that grant down. When those kids show up to school next fall, that trusted adult will not be there. You've told this program, as well as all the other programs, that the reason is they're violating civil rights laws. This program has no idea what you mean by that. And I guess I just ask you this. I'm sure you had to weigh factors in making this decision. But did you worry about what your decision would do to these kids where you've ripped away their counselors and social workers literally in the middle of the program? Do you worry about what's going to happen to those kids in Northwest Connecticut and kids all across the country who have lost access to their trusted adults?
I certainly worry about mental health for children and adults all across the country. I certainly do.
I guess I'm asking specific. You must have weighed this. I assume you weighed this when you made this extraordinary decision to shut down $1 billion worth of mental health programming for kids. Did you worry about what you would do to those specific kids?
Well, what we have to do, I think, and that's what our simplified funding program is going to do, is to put programs into a single grant that's going to the states to be determined how that money can be best used.
But how did you weigh the impact? I'm asking about this specific decision. How did you weigh the impact that, again, these kids in Northwest Connecticut, they literally say, this adult is the most important adult in my life. And you made a decision to shut down that program. And this can be replicated all over the country. How did you weigh the impact on those kids? It's a really cruel thing to do to those kids. So did you think about the impact on those kids?
Well, I certainly can't evaluate every particular program in every school district across the state. There are some areas that need mental health more than there are others. And there were programs in the mental health program that did deal with DEI and with gender issues, et cetera. And it wasn't just about the kind of things that you're talking about. So in totality, as we look at mental health grants across the country, we have to make sure that those programs are being used to serve best in those communities.
Yeah.
So therefore, a governor or a principal or a state superintendent would have the best information relative to what is needed in that particular state.
Yeah, we know what we need in Northwest Connecticut, and what we need is for the federal government not to rip funding away from these kids in need in the middle of the service program.
Or to better allocate the dollars you have and provide those professionals across the state that can handle it.
Let me ask you another question. Obviously, we're trying to understand what the Department of Education is doing with respect to the threats you've made against institutions of higher education. In the letter that you sent to Harvard demanding that they make certain changes, you told them that they had to end all of their diversity programs, but that they had to institute viewpoint diversity. That doesn't seem to make sense. How do you tell them to end all their diversity programs? And we assume that this is a mandate that you will make of other schools as well. How do you ask them to end diversity programs while instituting viewpoint diversity? Those seems to be totally contradictory.
This has led to programs across the country, including in Connecticut, shutting down, leaving vulnerable kids without access to trusted counselors. At the same time, the department has threatened to cut off funding to universities like Harvard and Columbia unless they eliminate certain DEI diversity, equity, inclusion programs and implement viewpoint diversity instead. This has sparked a debate over federal overreach, the interpretation of civil rights laws, and the proper role of government in shaping education policy. These decisions are now under intense scrutiny in Congress as lawmakers question whether the department weighed the real-world impact on students and stayed within its legal authority.
No, the diversity programs that we've asked and demanded to be eliminated were the DEI, where they were those programs actually were pitting one group against another.
Isn't viewpoint diversity a diversity program?
A viewpoint diversity is exchange of ideas that's actually better, absolutely. Now here, because Harvard only has 3%, by its own numbers, 3% conservative faculty, do you think they are allowing enough of viewpoint diversity through that teaching on campus?
Where in the statute does it give you the ability to cut off federal funding for a university based upon your decision, your determination that they don't have viewpoint diversity? Can you cite to a statute, an authority that Congress has given you to micromanage the viewpoint diversity of a college?
Well, certainly well, now let's back up.
Well, no. I think that's really important. I'm going to answer your question. Can you cite a statute? Because you can't cut off funding for universities unless you have a statutory authorization to do so. So what statute gives you the right to tell any university that they have to have a certain mixture of viewpoints?
So here's what happened with Harvard.
No, it's a pretty simple. I don't mean to provide being hostile.
Well, I have to give you some.
I think you have to cite the statute.
The statute's Title VI. These were civil rights violations. That is why we filed a case and defunded or stopped the funding for a while for Harvard, as well as we did Columbia. And in that conversation with them, we talked about different things that they should do coming back to the table to make their programming better. The president of Columbia absolutely indicated, as well as the president of Harvard, that they needed to do things on their campus to eliminate anti-Semitism. That was kind of the crux of what brought us into talking to the different universities. And then we sat down with them to say, okay, these are other issues that you need to address on your campus because you do receive federal funding. Under federal funding, if you are breaking the law, which they did under Title VI.
I don't understand any conception of civil rights law to give you the authorization to micromanage viewpoint diversity on campus. That's not authorized under the civil rights title provided to you by the United States Congress. Thank you very much.